Well, thank you so much. And I think what I am going to be doing to you, in contrast to the morning two speakers, is that from very, very grounded presentations in Australian and English law, I'm going to sort of like, use the Irish imagination and do a kind of a kite flying tour of trying to look at exactly what is it that the CRPD asks for in terms of legal capacity, and how is it that this changed demand or mandate of CRPD requires us to look at mental health law reform differently. We've all been on the receiving end of this paradigm shift, and I think those of us who even coined it are a little tired of it, and also a little worried by it, because you're increasingly finding that whatever I want to do is the new paradigm. And the word is kind of seems like omnibus enough to be able to encompass all manner of things. I thought what I would do this morning with you was to actually go and look at what I consider to be the old and the new. What are the kinds of, I would say, what are the attributes of the old paradigm, and what is it I see as the attributes of the new paradigm? The old paradigm, I think, to a large extent, was looked at the whole notion of legal capacity in a trifle more passive manner, was selective in the sense that it recognized the fact that some people had it and some people did not. It varied according to context. So when you came up with this whole notion of that, all right, can you do this kind of thing? Can't you do the other kind of thing? It was peculiar to people with disabilities. And I'm sort of saying this well cognizant of the fact that today we might be saying peculiar to persons with disabilities, but if we do any kind of a historical understanding of legal capacity, you would find that whether it was women at a certain state of mind, whether it was people from with indigenous origins at another point of time, you've had the whole question of legal capacity very much altering and changing depending upon what kind of legal status do you have. And that particular dimension of legal capacity needs to be kept in mind as we look at legal capacity in the context of people with disabilities. Also, a much more static understanding of legal capacity, though we did talk in terms of, especially for people with psychosocial disabilities, that you could be getting in and getting out of. You talked in terms of lucid intervals, you spoke in terms of recovery and coming back. But in the main, in the practice of how the old paradigm has operated, if you lost legal capacity, you generally lost it. The chances of your recovering it or getting back were small. You could get support, but you could get support after it was determined that you were not capable. And most of the business of how are you going to see that no kind of misuse happened was through externally monitored kind of safeguards, whether it is a well-elaborate mental health review tribunal, or whether it is any judicial authority or commissions or any other external modality, which was going to see to it that abuse did not happen. I'm essentializing, but in some way or the other, you would find resonance in that this old paradigm of legal capacity runs through the various kinds of legislations that we have and we encounter. In contrast, what is it that the CRPD was doing? The CRPD was looking at, first important thing somewhere was, it was looking at legal capacity as not just saying that, all right, you as a person have rights. You were speaking in terms of the capacity to act. And that capacity to act was a very critical component of how legal capacity was constructed and construed under the CRPD. You were saying it is universal. Everybody possesses it by the fact of being human. Nothing more is required. This whole question of that, do you understand, the comprehension test, the consequences test, all of those were kind of put aside, and you were just kind of saying legal capacity or sanity as such, thankfully for a lot of us, is a presumption of the law, and that presumption of the law should remain for everybody. It should not be singling out anyone and saying so-and-so possesses, so-and-so doesn't. And I think the universality component is a very critical component of the new paradigm. Applied to all areas of life. You are not anymore saying that, you can do this much, your daily activity living is possible, other things are not. You were saying everything as such is something in which I have legal capacity, and it is the presumption of the law. You're saying also that on equal basis with others, the whole point of the comparator that Phil spoke about when he did the entire presentation around liberty, was saying that the comparator is going to be the non-disabled community. And you're going to say that, all right, the way in which legal capacity is possessed by everybody else, people with disabilities would possess it the same way. You also recognize the whole notion of the evolving nature of capacity. That is, the more you use it, the better it becomes. The more exposure you have, the more opportunity you have. So it was the evolving nature of capacity was not put forth just for children. In fact, the fact that you put it for children, it automatically also meant that adults could be in that same kind of learning curve and operate accordingly. The most critical thing, I think, which needs to be appreciated was that you were speaking in terms of providing support along with capacity. So the fact that you sought support did not in any way mean that you lost capacity. I mean, and that's again a very important component of, and I think this particular thing I want you all to sort of take note of, because it's a very critical part of my argument this morning, and is to say that one of the most important things that the CRPD is doing is, it is saying that you can seek support without having to lose the legal capacity to organize your own affairs. And lastly, the whole issue of respecting of safeguards, or the question of safeguards, was seen more as something which was driven by the individual himself or herself. Because I have capacity, my will and preference has to be respected. I haven't to be unduly influenced or coerced. So I am going to be saying whether this is working or not working. See, and that is, you're not talking in terms of external monitors. It's not like there is no mention of external monitors in 12.4. But if we read 12.4 as a whole, you would find that it's much more dominantly speaking in terms of the control staying with the person with disability. And it's like, which point of time, for what kind of support systems would you look for external monitors, is something which is amongst the disputed questions in 12.4. But my purpose in sort of spending a little time on this old and new paradigm is because it is critical to the argument that I wish to set up with you this morning. I'm somewhere putting forth this thing that the altered construction of legal capacity needs to be guiding mental health reform. We need to be sort of making this connection between how the CRPD has conceived and visualized legal capacity in how we organize our mental health law reform. We can't keep with the old paradigm of legal capacity and try to say that we're going to proceed with mental health reform accordingly. That's one part of mine. The other thing that I sort of would want to put forth is the post-CRPD mental health law reform is one, of course, that there is an altered construction, and two, that there needs to be this change. And thirdly, I'm putting forth exactly what the components of, if I'm saying that some of the concerns which were addressed in mental health law reform even before the CRPD, I think it's extremely important for us to appreciate that our engagement with mental health reform has not been born with the CRPD. It was well done well before, and there were very many kinds of abuses, misuses, or dissatisfactions with mental health law, which were constantly engaged with world over in different kinds of manifestations or of mental health acts that you have coming in different parts. I think it's extremely important for us to appreciate that one point. And necessarily, if we are now coming back to mental health reform, should we be doing exactly what we were doing before the CRPD, or is the CRPD asking us to do different? My argument basically, or my contention or submission before you, is that it is asking us to do different. And exactly what is that different is the thrust of my presentation. I've been saying to Mary again and again, I'm doing what I would consider to be some kind of a kite flying or a speculative presentation. And I'm doing it in a cognizant audience with the hope that it would evoke the kind of discussion for which you come to conferences for. I mean, if I'm coming from the other side of the world, it's coming basically to say that, all right, this needs thinking, and it would be good for us to think together. I'm putting forth my own proposition on what I think needs to be done. Very, very quickly, I would say, I mean, I'm sort of capturing it, and I'm not in any way trying to say that every bit of a reform effort which has happened around mental health law before the CRPD is captured in these 3 bullet points. But I would somewhere say that at a very if I had to essentialize it, I would take it as these 3. One level is around the whole question of tests. You're saying, no, we can't have status and outcome. We need to have functional tests. We need to worry about how are we going to decide whether somebody has the mental capacity or not, from a point where just by a diagnosis this or that way and a person was considered incapable, you started to fine-tune, you started bringing in more tools and measurements, and a large amount of reform happened at that count, and said, we need to see to it that the person whom we are determining to be incapable is in fact so. It should not be, we should not over-include, we should only sort of keep the person out from doing that which the person cannot really do. And it was evidently an anxiety to see that we do not deny or deprive more than is necessary. That is one part of a lot, and very, very amazingly good work was done by a number of people. But what has to be appreciated somewhere is that in all that work, nobody was still questioning the fact of that everybody, or the fact that there would be deprivation of capacity for some people. You say you wanted to make it narrower and narrower, you wanted to make it more and more strict, but you were not questioning that fundamental premise that deprivation will happen. The second thing which also happened as a part of the reform was the routine institutionalization route, to be saying that institutionalization is the option, or the kind of option we have to put forth for people, especially people who were seen as danger to self or others. You started to say, even for that category of people, it has to be the last resort, the least restrictive alternative. Try to work out what is the way in which you can, as far as be, allow the person to function within the community. Try to, whether it was the whole revolving door policy, whether it was the fact of, how easy or difficult are we going to make institutionalization for people. The third kind of reform, which also came in, was, and I mean, of course, Phil Fennell gave us an entire, you can say, to the level of the absurd at a certain point, but the whole notion of fair process safeguards, to be saying that, yes, if I am going to deny somebody of their rights, then it must be accompanied with the whole range of fair process safeguards. Objective, again, to see to it that only that person who absolutely has to lose their right loses their right, nobody else. Have hearing, have adjudicators, have lawyers, have reasons, have appeal. You work out. And again, you find the sort of evaluations that people have done, how well this performed or not, I'm not getting into. And there have been generally a large amount of findings which say that fair process safeguards are much more a source of satisfaction to the non-disabled community that we have done our duty. What exactly it does to people with disabilities is something which people with disabilities do not find it to really do. It's at the end of the day, if you are taking my rights away from me, taking my autonomy away from me, whether you're doing it with fair or unfair process, how much of a difference it makes is a critical question. Now, if this is the way in which the pre-CRPD mental health law reform has happened, the question that we would have to then ask is, And all of us in our respective countries are engaged with trying to reform our mental health laws to bring it in conformity with the CRPD, which means with the new paradigm of legal capacity, which I had outlined to you right in the beginning of my presentation. What are the core questions we are asking? The kind of questions that we are asking is that, okay, all persons recognized, every legislation is saying everybody is recognized to possess legal capacity. But you are still asking questions like, is it really everybody? Do we need to have a test? Is there some ultimate point or some point at which a person loses capacity? It's the absolute minuscule person, but can it be happening? And in those rare cases of lack of capacity, how should decision making happen? Who should do it? Should force be barred in all situations? Should we have no compulsory care whatsoever? Are there situations in which, the rarest of rare situations, but where we might need to bring it in? What about emergencies? I'm sort of just putting forth as, whether it is the whole question of last resort questions, whether it is the fact of, is there some kind of test of capacity or incapacity which still need to bring in? These are dilemmas or questions which nearly every jurisdiction, it doesn't matter which part of the world you go to, you're going to find examples of that. My proposition or submission basically is that these dilemmas, are they very dramatically different from the kind of reform effort that you were doing in the pre-CRPD thing? I would say no. I would say that excepting for packaging it a little differently, at a very fundamental level, we are still doing mental health law reform under our old paradigm thinking of legal capacity. We've not really inducted the whole notion of universal legal capacity with support, which is the CRPD paradigm. And if we do that, then exactly what it would entail, what sort of questions we need to be starting to ask in the whole realm of mental health law reform I personally am of the opinion that those questions would change. My submission basically is that the research and other exercise that you would have to do would change. And for that, it is important somewhere to make the connection with the new paradigm and then look at, all right, how do I make for mental health law now? One is not asking for, one of the things all of us are aware of that when community care or deinstitutionalization happened in various parts of the world, all of us have learned post facto that one of the reasons why it kind of got so much of purchase was because it was so much cheaper. You could let people die on streets. You didn't have to, it was like some kind of a rights recipe for neglect. Now, is that the kind of point that one is putting forth, or is one putting forth something different? Or is CRPD asking us to do something different? I'm also sort of wanting to sort of resonate with Bernadette's presentation this morning when she was talking in terms of right to health as a positive right, asking for a range of services to be provided for. So you can't speak, if you are speaking in terms of a range of services to come at one end, Phil was speaking in terms of the whole issue of the right to liberty to be seen on an equal basis with others, not on an equal, not to say that the comparator cannot be the non-disabled person, it has to be another person with disability. If that's the kind of case that you're making, then in effect, we are nicely burying the new paradigm, we are not creating anything there, and that for me is the important thing. So I am somewhere putting forth that in the various kinds of, I'm sort of playing with this round and flat thing, because for a long time we thought that the world was flat. And one of the biggest change of paradigms was to recognize that it was round. And evidently, it's important somewhere to understand that the new paradigm of legal capacity is a much more rounded kind of a paradigm. Are we, in the way in which we are trying to do mental health reform or other law reform under it, flattening it? Because we are comfortable with the world being flat. And it's important somewhere to keep that in mind is what my submission to you would be. Okay, if this is what I'm saying, then what would the new paradigm require? See, I'm saying that, you're asking these kinds of questions. You're saying, all right, force or no force, accord one some test of capacity, the whole question of least restrictive, all of these are questions, even the various sorts of, saying that, yeah, we're going to have these really high safeguards to see no abuse happens. You're staying with the old paradigm. That's the proposition I'm putting forth. Then it's important for me to at least put out to you what I think should be done under the new paradigm. And that's what the rest of my presentation is about. I would somewhere firstly say that we have to, and it's going to require a certain amount of open-ended thinking on our part, a total acceptance of the presumption of legal capacity that all humans possess it just by the fact of being human. And this is an important thing. The other limb of this is that this right is accompanied with a state obligation to provide support. Yes, I am putting forth a legal fiction. Yesterday we had a small meeting on the whole area of mental health reform, which Michael Bach was leading. And one of the things he was saying is that a number of parents are saying there's a limit to how far you can take fiction. I am putting forth the point that, yes, it is a legal fiction, but as fiction, and all of us know why we go for fiction, because some sorts of things can only be done in the realm of the imagination first. And I am sort of somewhere saying is that take this legal fiction to its nth conclusion. Don't sort of somewhere after you have created half the world in that fictive manner, panic and say the other half has to be factually created. And I'm sort of putting forth that if it's a presumption of the law, if it's a legal fiction, it needs to extend to all manner of people. There cannot be any sort of factual relationship to the real possession of capacity this or that way. If it is to be factual, then it has to be factual across the board. Can we really have everybody's capacities being challenged, tested, and then determined, okay, can you contract? Can you marry? Can you be educated? Can you be employed? Can we do it? If we can't, then are we not saying that when we do it for people with disabilities, if that is not discrimination, if that is not prejudice, then what is? That's my fundamental kind of question there. So the second thing that I would say that it's an equality, non-discrimination at one level argument, but more importantly, I am putting forth the law actually revels in fictions. And a large amount of the law has been able to carry on because of the presumption of sanity. We're all presumed to be of sound mind the moment we sort of reach majority. If we actually did a reality check, I can assure you, a number of us would be in a lot of trouble. So, the second part. What is the essential requirement of making a choice? The essential requirement of making a choice is not the mental capacity to be able to make a choice or not. The essential requirement of making a choice is to have a choice to make. See, it's like if all that I'm being served for breakfast every day is boiled eggs, then to be choosing whether you're only saying is that do you want to have boiled eggs or nothing at all. That's no choice. If we are speaking in terms of wanting to create choice, then it's important somewhere to be creating, and that's where I tie up with the kind of point which Bernadette was making, need to have a range of choices and services being put out there, and that I tie up with the duty to provide support. Bring out those choices, and you'd find that people vote with their feet. We make choices not necessarily from our cognitive faculties, our tastes, our sensibilities, our a whole range of my liking somebody's face, my not liking somebody, just saying that, oh no, this person is not somebody I'm comfortable with, gets you to decide a whole range of whether you'll do a book with an individual or you won't. There's nothing really sitting there very systematically, cognitively worked out. I've looked at the person's bio, the performance, nothing of that kind. I just said I did not feel comfortable. I don't want to work with individual. Or I took to this person and I did it. Choices are made, but most importantly for me, the most critical aspect of making a choice is we need to have choices available for people. And that I see as the second component of mental health law reform. Large amount of choices, really create a menu card there, be imaginative about it, ask people what they require, and proceed on that basis. And that's wherein, I suppose, the disability-driven reform comes in, that we consult with, talk with people with disabilities, saying what kinds of choices would be appropriate. And you might find that the landscape as such starts to change very. The third kind of component I put forth here is we need to really explore the equality possibilities a lot more than we are doing till now. We need to see the commonalities between persons with and without disabilities. Support is not a unique requirement of people with disabilities. Maybe it's a much more forthright requirement of people with disabilities, but it is a need of all of us. I think it's a very integral part of human interdependence that we need each other. And I'm quite certain that as a woman standing out here, a large amount of caring responsibilities, if they had not been fulfilled by women, you would really speaking, the whole question of having massive investments into the care regimes of the world would have happened. It's because a large amount of unpaid care was available all over that we did not put it as high in priority. My only point somewhere is this, that we as human beings need each other. The support setup is something which might be prompted by the disability agenda, but it's not. People with disabilities are definitely not going to be the sole beneficiaries of it. That's the first point. The second, I think, also is that we need to somewhere examine the whole component of reasonable accommodation to be saying that, okay, if you are saying this is something that the person with disability needs a little extra on, is it something which merits an exclusion, or is it only a certain level of a fine-tune or modification of your existing setup? That's the kind of query I would have. And more importantly, for a number of norms which land up excluding people, again and again, if it is people with disabilities who run into trouble on it, we might need to ask, how disability-friendly is that norm? Is it accessible? So it's like reasonable accommodation and accessibility need to be kind of brought on board in the way in which we construct our mental health law reform, and not just to think in terms of in institutions, outside institutions. Are we going to be having this kind of invasive therapy or something else? I think mental health as such is a much, much wider kind of term than just to say, okay, we have to be addressing the fact of mental illness. The point which, again, Bernadette was making in the morning when she was saying, turning away people and the mental health tribunal being able to order that you have to be providing that treatment is somewhere to be saying in terms of that you can't sort of say that we will give you the same point of no choice, nothing at all, and then when you are out there hitting people, trying to kill yourself, that's when we will act, and that's what our mental health law is going to be about. If that's what our mental health law is going to be about, then let's accept the fact that we are using force to subsidize the whole not wanting to invest in the resources by which people need to flourish and grow. It's important somewhere to accept it, at least honestly. My last point, and I think to some extent this resonates with the point which Phil Fennell was making in his, where he was saying don't overcrowd the legal landscape. I'm saying we need to, what I would say, and it's ironical that I'm saying it in the context of, or maybe paradoxical that I'm saying it in the context of mental health law reform. I am saying we need to under-legislate. It's an area which is over-legislated. You really can't speak in terms of creating relationships of trust through procedures of mistrust. It's not possible to do so. You can't really speak in terms of, we need to, if we want to develop the skills of persuasion, we need to outlaw force. And there is something, there's something to be said that the permission to use force, I think really, really needs to be ousted. And I also do think somewhere it's important, and this is again, which will come from how many of us can really say that every single thing that we do because we wanted to do it as autonomous beings. I think we are all persuaded, sometimes by love, sometimes by a little bit of emotional blackmail, sometimes by some level of good reasoning, sometimes by just somebody's very charming way of saying something. We are. And I think it's important for us, especially in the realm of mental health, to appreciate that there is a need to be distinguishing between force sanctioned by the law and the force of persuasion. I honestly do think that psychiatrists and psychologists do themselves an ill turn. And enough kind of investments have not happened into how do you persuade people? How is it that we get people to come, to do things which are good for them without the other person feeling oppressed? And it's an important part of how all of us grow and develop, feel that we are flourishing, and that is good mental health. The CRPD has put up that kind of paradigm of legal capacity. The CRPD is somewhere asking us to construct the human in a more inclusive manner, in a more interdependent kind of an understanding of each other. And it's that kind of vision of the CRPD which needs to be informing more than any other place mental health laws. If we sort of make these into dichotomous questions, this or that, yes or no, right or wrong, evidently we're going to keep going around that same mill again and again. I'm asking very honestly the realm of imagination, of creativity to be unleashed, for us to think about it in some ways on first principles, for us to really sort of work on mental health law reform under the new paradigm of legal capacity. I want to end very, it's a small anecdote and a smallish kind of a quotation which I want to put out there. At a very critical juncture of the negotiations on legal capacity, there was a point at which it became quite evident to people who were working very hard on the article that the state parties were not very comfortable with this whole question of universal legal capacity and wanted some kind of a clause there by which, of course in the rarest of rare cases, but capacity could be denied. So the International Disability Caucus, with whom I was very actively associated, was doing, one of the things which they were doing was they used to bring out an everyday newsletter. So when this came to light, a special issue of the newsletter was brought out. And the special issue of the newsletter was titled Imagine. And I'm just sort of like putting up on the screen, there was this whole question of if someone else was making decisions for you, they could decide to take you away, lock you up, not listen to you, give you medication, block you from doing your work, and living your life with your body and mind the way they are. Would you want this to happen to you? And then carry on with, would you not feel this, that, and the other? But I'm sort of like wanting to do the next thing there and say, imagine that the principles established in this convention are universal and will apply to all human beings as much as to you as to me. And let us make a convention for a world where we can all grow and develop with mutual support. Imagine a convention for all. I just want to sort of add on a single line and say, imagine a mental health law for all. Imagine a law which would make for growth and development of all beings. Imagine interventions of a kind which will heal, not harm. Thank you.